Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone, for coming. I know people are filling in. I'm going to go ahead and start. We have a lot to get to today in a short period of time. This session is building event-driven pipelines with Brigade. So we're going to talk all about Brigade. If you're new to Brigade, you don't know a lot about Brigade, this session's perfect for you. We're going to kind of start from the beginning, and we're actually going to build the entire thing, including deploying an entire cluster and kind of pipeline all at once. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Brian Redmond. I work for Microsoft. I'm a cloud architect on our Azure Global Black Belt team. That is my last name. That's not where I work. That's not where I live. Get this a lot. I've been there 17 years, so I've been talking through that little thing for much of my career. I'm based out of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. It's kind of the Northeast in the States. I spend my time running marathons and doing things outside. In fact, I always have this picture on my intro slide. But in my time hop today, I don't know if you use time hop, this was actually the exact date of that race 3 years ago today. So this is the pre-race photo, so I look all kind of refreshed. You don't look that way after the race. And that's my Twitter handle, and I can explain it to you at another time. So this is the audience participation part of the talk. I like to do this kind of thing to kind of keep you awake. We're going to decide the best programming language today. Whatever we decide here will be binding. So make sure that you vote correctly. You can vote for any of the languages as much as you want, but the way you're going to vote is you're going to send a text message to one of these four numbers, and your vote is actually going to be your message. I'm actually going to do a sentiment analysis. I'm going to send this off to an AI service in Azure called Cognitive Services, and we're going to do a sentiment analysis of your text message, and I'm going to convert that into my 1 through 5 rating scale, and then we'll actually collect those in a voting database, all right? It actually supports multiple languages, apparently. We tried it with Danish earlier. It doesn't support a few sort of languages like Japanese and so forth, but in theory, you can send whatever you want. Who knows what kind of votes and messages you'll get back. For this, I'm actually using OpenFast. So I'm running a Kubernetes cluster in Azure. I work with Azure in our Azure cloud. So I'm running an AKS cluster, and on top of that, I have OpenFast installed. And I have just a simple function there. That function receives a webhook from Twilio. That's where your text messages are actually being sent. And from that, I actually call into this Azure Cognitive Services, and then I deploy or insert the result into Azure Cosmos DB. So very simple sort of process. It might be interesting to kind of see what kind of votes we're getting here as we go. We can see the votes actually coming in. I think we started at 6. I had a few in there already. So we'll kind of see this as it's going. This is an OpenFast demo, but I like to kind of use that to kind of show all the different sort of technologies that we can use in Kubernetes kind of as we go. So fun. What we don't have in our application is a web app. And so we need a web front end to actually see what the results are of our votes, to actually decide who wins. This actually isn't a meme off the internet. I took this at a customer site a couple weeks ago. Where I live in Pittsburgh. So I think it's kind of crazy that not only are we tracking Internet Explorer usage, but we're also finding that people are still using Internet Explorer 8, which is shocking, or at least should be shocking. So often we're deploying these web apps. This is kind of what we do. We deploy it, we say apply, and off it goes. We cross our fingers. Even if we have some kind of deployment pipeline, we're often in that kind of scenario where we're just kind of hoping it works well. We're going to end up doing a deployment pipeline with our web app. I don't know that everybody hates pipelines. Certainly if they're working well, you might kind of love them. But in general, we're building pipelines to do CI/CD. And the pipeline we're going to build today is very simplistic. It's by no means a description of a good pipeline. It's really meant to be showing you kind of how you would do automation. And then obviously from there, you might build a much more complex pipeline. Certainly in my case, I work at Microsoft. It might be great to actually say, file new pipeline, and have Clippy pop up and actually build out the proper kind of pipeline for me. We're not going to do that. We're not going to see Clippy today, besides right here. So we're going to use Brigade to do this. And again, what is Brigade? Brigade equals event-driven scripting for Kubernetes. In some ways, it's actually similar to some of the serverless frameworks, like an OpenFast. We have events that trigger some kind of workflow, and my various functions in this case are going to be containers in Kubernetes. I may have a pretty complex workflow, a series of containers. Some steps might run in parallel, others might just run in series. I want to describe that pipeline, in this case with JavaScript. And so I use JavaScript to define that workflow. And the difference here is I could have a very long running kind of pipeline. It's not a simple quick function that runs and then returns a result. I actually want to build something that can, for CI/CD, for example, integrate my code, run a series of tests, actually deploy canary builds. I want all that kind of complexity, and Brigade can help me with that. It comes with some basic gateways, things like GitHub and Docker registry, so you can actually trigger this kind of workflow off of those kind of things. But frankly, you can trigger it off anything, absolutely anything. You can write your own gateway to trigger it off of data being written into a queue, into a storage container, whatever that may be. It is well suited for CI/CD, certainly helpful when we want to have things like secrets in our pipeline, like passwords to things like a container registry or things like that. Brigade kind of helps it make it very easy for me to put those into a project file and inject those into my pipeline. So I'm not putting passwords right in my script, which would be a big mistake. So here's what the architecture looks like. The components that we'll install initially in Brigade are a gateway. In this case, by default, I'll get this GitHub gateway. I also get a controller, which really does the work. The gateway just says to the controller, take this action. It actually spawns a worker that will actually run our actual pipeline. And that spawns a series of jobs. Those jobs, all of these components, are just Kubernetes pods. We do have this project file that feeds into that as the event is fired. We're going to collect all that data out of our project and actually run this kind of thing end to end. And of course, there's also an API pod for access to the data inside and out of Brigade in general. So that's a quick picture of the architecture. I'm actually going through the slides pretty fast because in general, I think people learn best by demo. So we're going to try to get to the demo pretty quickly. Effectively, we're going to install Brigade. We're going to push code into GitHub, which will fire a webhook. I'll do two things in that Brigade pipeline. I'll actually send my code and my Docker file up to my Azure Container Registry, and I'll have it built in the cloud. That's where I'm going to store it anyway. We're announcing some new features in that service that will actually allow you to build containers in the cloud. They're announcing it next week, but they're letting me talk about it today, which is kind of fun. And then we'll actually do a Helm upgrade and deploy it in the cluster. And in this case, it isn't there already, so it actually will be a brand new install, but this pipeline will also allow us to do upgrades as well. So with that, let's do some live coding. And I hate to tell you this, but we're going to actually do pair programming today. It's going to be me programming with you. If anything goes wrong, it's collectively all of our fault. I've been pretty successful on my own. I've tried this out a few times. So if we fail here today, it might be a little bit more your fault, I hate to say. So let's get started. Actually, let's go over and see what kind of votes we have here. Good, everybody's participating. We don't know what the results are. We're going to work hard to get that here in a moment. So let's take a look at our cluster. And so you can see I have a few pods actually in the cluster already. I do have these APIs that they're actually working in conjunction with the stuff that I installed with OpenFast. So you can see I installed OpenFast. I have a function in another namespace, but these APIs are actually the way that the data is getting into the database. Again, we're going to need to deploy this web app in this actual app deployment. I'm going to use some snippets over here in a gist to do some of these steps. And so we're going to install Brigade first. And we'll see that kind of pop up. Pretty straightforward. We'll see those three components come up, the API, the controller, and in this case, the GitHub gateway. I had some other parameters and things we could look through that chart. We could do a lot of different things for that installation. I don't have to use the GitHub gateway. I can configure it with RBAC, all those kinds of things. But we really just skipped right past that. Looks like Brigade is already running. I'll let you take a look at the services in this cluster as well. You can see I'll end up getting IP addresses for the API and the GitHub gateway. We're going to end up using that GitHub gateway for our webhook that we're going to plug into GitHub here in a moment. So the next thing we need is a Brigade project. And this is kind of the structure of what a project file would look like. This is where I put all that information that I consider secret, or even it's just configuration details. I tell it the GitHub repository. In my case, I just need credentials to things like Azure. And so I'm going to give it an Azure Service Principal, which is really just a service account that has access to my subscription. I'm not going to show you my real project file. I thought about just showing it and changing it all later, but this is being recorded, and I just picture that being a disaster for me. So the real file is there in the repository, so we'll actually use that and go do our deployment of our project. The project is also deployed via a Helm chart. I'll let you take a look at that here. And so we said helm install. I pointed to the Brigade project chart, and I'm going to pass in that YAML file, which again is the same file as I just showed you, except all the values are actually filled in. And we have a little CLI with Brigade that can let me do a few different commands, and it's going to show me the list of my projects. And I only have this project, of course, because Brigade was just installed freshly here now. And so any kind of project, we could have a bunch of different projects and tie them to various events that come in via our gateway. Okay? Everybody good so far? Seems like a bell might have been appropriate there. Okay. So now we need a pipeline. And this is just empty pipeline. And effectively, we're going to have various event handlers. In our case, we're going to handle the push event, and we're going to do sort of an after event. So when we're done, we're going to actually perform some action if we're successful. And so we need to add some things here. And so I'm going to first just set up a series of variables. And most of the time, I'm going to cut and paste this code, to be honest, because having you watch me type might be pretty painful. But we're going to pull something from that Brigade project. So this is where I'm not going to type my actual password or information from that project. So I'm pulling out of that project file. This is a great way for me in my pipeline to not have secrets in the actual pipeline file. So I pulled that in and set that as my ACR server. Again, we're going to set a bunch of variables. I'm just going to paste all of these in. We're setting things like my Azure credentials. I'm building a dynamic image tag based on the commit ID, just some basics like that. This just kind of sets the stage. I can also write things out to the log. And so I can say, started, obviously do whatever I want in there. Now I need to define my various jobs. And so I'm going to say, first, I'm going to do ACR, and it's equal to a new job. And we'll call it job runner ACR builder. You can make that whatever you want. I started calling them job runner, and so now permanently that's what they're all called. That's the standard at this point. But I'm going to paste in the rest of this and then show you kind of what we're doing here. And so what I've said is for that job, I'm not going to use storage, but multiple jobs may need to pass information back and forth, so we support storage between the different jobs. I'm telling it the image I want to use, and so I've got an image in my container registry that has the Azure CLI built in for it, and that'll allow me to run these Azure commands. And then I very simply log into Azure with that service principal that I pulled out from my secret file, and I do a build. And this is, again, some new functionality that's just being announced. But I pass some build args, but really the main key is I'm setting the image tag, and I'm setting the context of where I'm sitting locally, where my code and my Docker file is. And so that'll run off and do my build. So that'll take care of the build part of this. We also need to do a Helm step here. So we'll say Helm job, and we'll call this one job runner. Helm. And we'll do a similar thing here. I'll paste this in and briefly explain it. So again, I'm using a container that has the Helm CLI in it, and I'm doing a Helm upgrade-install. That'll take care of, since the app isn't already there, it'll do a fresh install. I'm pointing to the chart that's in the same repo, and again, all I'm doing is dynamically setting the image tag so that we'll get this new deployment, or this new image that we just built. And so that part will take care of for us. Now we've only defined the jobs, we actually have to run them. And so I'm going to create a pipeline here, and it is a group. Oops. And to that pipeline, we're going to add both of these. So again, I'll just paste this real quick. At that point, our pipeline is done. Run each says, run them in order. If any one step fails, then the whole thing has kind of gone wrong and stop an error out. And so we're done from a standpoint of our defining our pipeline. We do also need to set up the webhook. And so I've got some quick commands to make this easier for us. Again, you'll see that we had this service earlier, and you can see I now have this IP address for the GitHub gateway. We're going to go over to GitHub and simply create a webhook. Oh, we've got to log in. Okay, and this is where that did not work. my machine trying to help me out. No worries, this part is where it's your fault. All right, we're going to press on. We can figure this out. I need to remember what the... Yeah. See, help from the audience. What is it, events? Remind myself what the webhook is. Events/GitHub. And we're going to get JSON. And I need a secret, and this is actually something that is important. In that project file, we passed a password. That's the password that the GitHub hook is going to say to the gateway to actually execute. And so we need to actually paste that in here. And we're going to get just the push event. And you can see it's active and seems to be working. So let's go ahead and push our code, ship it, right? We do a push. Right into production, right into master. That's normal, right? So luckily, things have kicked off correctly, and we have this worker that's started. The worker is actually the one that's going through my JavaScript file that we just wrote together and executing those steps. And hopefully what it's going to do is actually kick off these job runners. And again, the reason it's called job runner, you saw where we actually put in that name. We actually see that this thing is already running. If we take a look at the logs, it's logged me into my subscription. It'll actually go out and start performing the different steps and going through and running through that pipeline. And this is probably the one that takes the longest. This is where I'll start to do things to distract you while you're waiting for that to finish. But we could look at these logs, and that's one way to see what's going on. It's probably not the best way to see what's going on. What we really want to do is install a web sort of front end to the pipeline. And so Brigade has a dashboard called Kashti that lets me actually see all the results of this. So let's actually go and install that. And I forgot to get the API. And so I'm actually pointing, that's why I made the API server external here. I'm going to point at it to do this. And it is 7745. So hope I did that right. And we've added Kashti. And once that's up and running, we'll be able to see the service for it and connect to it. And I'll give it a minute. You can see I'm waiting for a public IP address from the cloud. And of course, Kashti is now up and running. We can actually hit that with a port forward if we're not willing to wait. And I'm not. And we'll just map it to 8081. See what's going on here. So Kashti will come up and detect the projects that are running in this cluster. And of course, this is the one we just added. And we can see we only have one build running. This was where all the build history would be. Since we just did this, we only have one build. And you can see we're still in the middle of the ACR builder job. And so actually go in and take a look at the logs that's going on here. And we could scroll down, and you can see we're pretty far along. We've actually completed the container registry build. So the build is actually complete. Since we built it in the cloud, that's where we're going to store it. Odds are, by the time I go back and take a look at this, we've actually completed the Helm step, because that goes pretty fast. Let's go over and take a look. You can see we now have a web application in container creating. And again, I'm going to pop out of this and see if we have a service for that. We're waiting for the IP address for that one. So Kashti is a cool way to see what's happening with builds. I can have lots of different projects in that interface. In fact, someone out in the community actually built another tool for me to see what's happening. I love this. Slack, I don't know who Slack is, but he made a Brigade term. So let's actually see how this does. It's kind of my command line version of Kashti. So look at this. We have this sort of terminal interface to that. And we can see the same information we just saw over in Kashti. I can actually go in. I see a successful push event. We can see the two jobs that are run. We can see the logs from the Helm standpoint. It looks like it actually worked. and we can actually see everything that's happening. So I love seeing that Brigade term. Again, we can look through the logs. I have lots of different things to be able to get sort of visibility into what's going on in the pipeline. Now let's see if I have an IP address. Waiting for an IP address, and we will continue waiting. Now while we're waiting, I want to do something else with our pipeline. And so we had this after event. What I actually want to do is tweet something. I want to sort of live tweet something that's actually happening here. And so we have the ability to add Twitter code here. And so I'm going to paste this in and then talk you through it. So my Twitter code says, just like before, we had these jobs that were doing our build process. Now I have a container that will do Twitter options or functions. So I'm going to actually feed into it a series of environment variables that have access to a Twitter application. And then I'm going to tweet, live tweet from Brigade at KubeCon, and we're going to see this actually work. Now notice I have a bunch of project details here. And so when we made the project at the beginning, we didn't supply these. So we actually need to add those to our project. And so I'll just show you kind of where we would put them. Go here at the end of this project file, and we'd fill in these values. Again, I've already done this kind of for us, but we'd go over to Twitter and collect those from our Twitter application. And from there, we have to do a Helm upgrade for our project. So this is actually a nice thing. Because I have this ability to have these values in a project file, it's very easy for me to add things to the project. I haven't really changed anything of the current functionality. I'm just adding the capability to do Twitter. And so now we've plugged those things into the project. When we execute this pipeline, we're now going to be able to tweet live. And we're hopefully going to see that actually happen here on my Twitter when we do this. And so I've saved that code. I do need to show you the web page. Let's see if we have an IP address. We do. Let's see what this thing looks like. Oh, ugly color, ugly color. And here's the votes. Apparently nobody likes Python. That's not surprising to me. I'm kind of shocked about the C#. But I will say the color is terrible. We have a good bit of votes coming in. But the reason the color is a bit terrible is, I don't know if you know this, I actually did this a little bit of a similar thing at KubeCon in North America in December. You can actually put HTML colors, you can put funny names in there. And so let's actually see what the name is representing this. Let's go into our app, into the web app here, and take a look at our HTML. And it actually looks like that color is Steven Seagal. Sorry for the Steven Seagal fans, but that is a bad color. And what would be the color we would replace Steven Seagal with?
Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris, of course we would. So we've not only changed the color, we've updated our pipeline to tweet. I think we're ready to push this. And again, we will ship it and push this out. And we'll see this actually execute. Go back over here. And we're going to see the same steps execute here. Again, we will actually end up kicking off another job to do the Twitter part of this. And if we go over to my Twitter page, let's just make sure we don't have any tweets there already. You can imagine I probably tested this a couple times. So I tweeted about Jeremy's session on Service Broker earlier, and that's pretty cool to see that there. But I don't have any recent tweets. So when this thing finishes, we're going to see that there. And we'll wait for that to actually finish. In the meantime, I do want to make one other point. The pipeline we're doing here with Brigade is all about GitHub. The GitHub is our gateway. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, Brigade is a lot more than CI/CD. We can kind of perform any kind of function here as far as a series of steps. We might want to create some kind of custom gateway. And certainly you can do anything you want. You can take the gateway code for those. It's all open source and build your own. But we did want to make it easier for you to actually build a Brigade pipeline. And when I say we, I actually mean Matt Butcher on the team that actually did a lot of the work around Brigade, wrote a blog post around this. And I think it's worth actually sharing this with you. The team that created Helm and tools like Brigade that we're talking about today also created a tool called Draft. Draft makes it easy to sort of not only bootstrap the development process, but also do that kind of inner loop iterative development where I write some code, I need to push it into Kubernetes, maybe not in production Kubernetes, but I want to kind of go through that again and again. And Draft helps me with that. And so we'll use Draft actually here to do this. And I'm going to make a directory here, call it my gateway. And all we have to do this, it's quite simple. I do a draft create, and I tell it this sort of draft pack that I want. And so that's where, in my directory here is empty, we obviously just created it, that's where the intelligence actually comes in. I've actually pointed that and set that up on my machine so that when we open VS Code here, we see a skeleton project here to create a Brigade Gateway. So this is a great place to get started. This one's written in JavaScript. They can be written in any language. And this one uses sort of webhook kind of functionality. You don't actually have to do that yourself. You could be, again, monitoring things like a queue, doing whatever you need. This is a great way to get started. I'm not real good at file new empty projects. And so I like to take advantage of this. This might give me a chance to actually create a gateway myself. All I need to do to actually run this thing is I say draft up. So draft does some things for me, and I actually suspect this will fail, and it doesn't really matter. But what it does is it first builds the image for me, and then it pushes it into a container registry. And I have it set up to push it into Azure Container Registry. And I may not be logged into Azure Container Registry, which thankfully it doesn't allow me to push that there. Perhaps I am logged in or not. It'll be fun to find out. But what it'll also do is push this into my Kubernetes cluster, whichever one is my current context. That's super simple for me to actually get this thing up and running, get it started, curl the endpoint, understand how it works, and then start coding my gateway, changing it, building it, and then all you do is that same process, draft up, run it again, and it'll take care of this part for me, which is the painful part. All right? Makes sense? So hopefully that makes sense as far as how you get a gateway up and running. Let's go take a look. It looks like our pipeline finished. We could actually go over to Kashti. Well, Kashti isn't there. I don't have my port forward. Let's take a look at Brigade term. Does anybody know how much time I have left? Anybody?
17 minutes after.
Perfect. So you can see everything looks like it finished. That's good. In fact, we should go over and check Twitter and see if we actually got a new tweet. That looks successful. That's exciting. Bells, right? We live tweeted right here with Brigade. Now let's just go see if Chuck Norris saved the day. Chuck Norris did save the day. It already looks a bit better. That's exciting. So we're successful. Very good. Pair programming. We did it. All right. So, again, I think it's best to learn kind of building end to end. That was our goal here today. We didn't have any catastrophic failures. I will take questions. It may be easier to take questions kind of on the side. There's a short transition time here, so I'll probably just wrap up. You can find me. That's pronounced Cheeseburger71. Again, I will explain that later if you want. I'll be working at the Azure booth. A bunch of us are there to talk about these things and many more things of our Azure cloud. You can email me as too. That's my work email address. I did put the demo code out in GitHub. It's mostly explained how to do it. I'll put a little bit of time in maybe documenting it better, but hopefully you sort of get the idea of end to end how to do this. So I thank you guys for coming and participating. Yeah, thank you.